I have reached a tentative agreement, verbal agreement, and I emphasize verbal, with Joel Greenberg's attorney, Fritz Scheller, for restitution in the amount of $1,870,351.61.
That was the voice of Brian Applegate, the county attorney for Seminole County, Florida. He was delivering an update to commissioners on an unusual, secretive task that most county attorneys won't ever have to take on: negotiating restitution from a former elected official who embezzled enormous sums from the public coffers. That task fell on Applegate's desk after Joel Greenberg, the former Seminole tax collector, pleaded guilty to 6 federal crimes in May, admitting that he had used his elected office as a piggy bank, giving himself personal loans with public money and using those taxpayer dollars to buy himself cryptocurrency. Calculating what Greenberg owes in restitution to his victims has been one of several factors that contributed to repeated delays of his sentencing hearing, which was originally slated for August and is now set to take place in March. In the meantime, the complicated work of determining the appropriate punishment for one of the most corrupt politicians in Central Florida's history, and which of his associates should also face charges, is playing out behind closed doors.
For quite some time, I have told this board in regards to restitution from our former taxpayer and others that we need to proceed prudently, patiently, and cautiously. And of course, the main reason for this course of conduct is that, quite simply, there are a number of investigations ongoing, and there may be more investigations in the future.
Hello and welcome to Joel Greenberg, the man, the scandal, the players. Brought to you by the Orlando Sentinel. I'm your host, Jeff Weiner. You may have noticed it's been a while since our last episode, and that news stories delivering updates on the Greenberg saga have arrived less frequently. But while the case may appear dormant from the outside, behind the scenes, it's still progressing. As his plea agreement required, Greenberg has been cooperating with federal authorities as they continue a sprawling investigation that emerged from his case, which reportedly has examined everything from questionable contracts he doled out to friends to potential public corruption in the medical marijuana industry and sex trafficking allegations against prominent allies, including Congressman Matt Gaetz. So far, Greenberg remains the only person we know has been charged in connection with his illegal activities. But recently, the same prosecutors with whom he has been cooperating unveiled an indictment against 2 of Greenberg's former associates, charging them with a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme, an indication that, somewhere within the prosecutorial machine, the gears are still turning. And as that March sentencing date approaches, with a judge having made clear there will be no more delays, it's likely the fruits of Greenberg's cooperation with the feds will soon begin to spill into view. With that in mind, in today's episode we're going to bring you up to speed on recent developments in the investigation and the efforts to make Greenberg's victims whole, and also look ahead to the new year, which has the potential to be a very eventful one.
I think with all my clients, not just Mr. Greenberg, once they're involved in the criminal justice system, they have a path they have to walk, and it's a difficult path, and it's a path towards rebuilding their lives, sense of remorse for the mistakes they've made, and rehabilitation. And that applies to Mr. Greenberg.
That was the voice of Fritz Scheller, the defense attorney who represented Greenberg as he negotiated his plea deal with prosecutors, and also as he has met with them to provide information that could determine whether anyone else is ultimately charged in the case. Scheller was speaking after an October hearing at which a judge granted one final delay of Greenberg's sentencing date, something sought by both sides, the government and the defense. There were a few reasons they wanted additional time. One was to sort out Greenberg's restitution. Another was that he was continuing to meet with prosecutors to provide information about his criminal activities that might help them build a case against others involved. Those meetings could define the next chapter of Greenberg's life. That's because he's facing a mandatory minimum of 12 years in federal prison for the sex trafficking and identity theft charges he pleaded to. But prosecutors have said they would recommend a lighter sentence if he provides what's known as substantial assistance. What assistance qualifies as substantial? We asked Mark O'Mara, a longtime Orlando defense attorney and legal commentator.
It's a term of art that is defined much more by prosecutors and by judges than it ever is defined by defense attorneys or their clients. So assistance is just that. I help you out with something, but it's not particularly significant. It is, I can tell you that my co-defendant was in the car with me. Not my help. But substantial means that it really has to be something that the government would not otherwise have, that you've given them. And the real definition of it is it leads to a charge against somebody and probably a conviction. So, and that's, if there was a definition in some book in the prosecutor's office, it is determined to be substantial if they get additional charges on other people and they get them convicted.
Here's a quick reminder of some of the things Greenberg has admitted to and what we know about other potential targets of federal authorities. Greenberg admitted that he embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the tax office to buy himself cryptocurrency. As far as we know, he's the only person implicated in the Bitcoin scam, but reports have indicated that federal prosecutors are also examining contracts he gave to fellow politicians and other friends and allies, which auditors for the county could not explain or deemed frivolous. Greenberg confessed to fraudulently obtaining nearly $500,000 in federal loans meant for businesses struggling due to COVID-19. On this, we already know from court filings that he had help from a friend who connected him to an employee of the Small Business Administration who pushed through the loans. Neither has been publicly identified, but both potentially face charges for their roles in the scheme. Greenberg also confessed to paying more than $70,000 over 2 years for sex with women he met online, and one 17-year-old girl. According to his plea deal, Greenberg would invite the minor to meet and have sex at hotels around Central Florida, and would often supply ecstasy to her and other attendees, and also introduced her to adult men who had sex with her too. The plea agreement didn't identify the other men, but according to reports, federal authorities are investigating whether Gaetz, the Panhandle Congressman, Trump acolyte, and ultra-conservative firebrand, was among them. He has denied having sex with the girl or ever paying anyone for sexual favors. According to O'Mara, one reason for the deliberate pace of Greenberg's cooperation with investigators is that they cannot simply take the disgraced politician and admitted fraudster at his word.
The government wants to make sure that they get as much information as they can out of Greenberg, as much cooperation, as much documentation of other sources to corroborate what Greenberg is telling them, because they're not just going to rely on what he says. They now take that as sort of the seed or the kernel, and they have to let it grow with other investigations and wait until that sort of bears some fruit for them.
For his part, Gaetz has sought to distance himself from Greenberg, who he once considered his wingman.
Well, joining us in the studio is Congressman Matt Gaetz. Busy schedule. We haven't seen him in a while. It's so long, I'm not even sure where to start. But first of all, let's thank you for coming into the studios and talking to us today.
That's an interviewer for ABC3 News in the Florida Panhandle, Gaetz's home turf. Gaetz granted the news outlet an interview in October, giving some of his most expansive comments on the Greenberg saga to date. He said he had been told by the FBI that he's not a target in the Greenberg investigation, and questioned his former friend's credibility.
You guys still friends, or I'm assuming the answer is no?
No, when I became aware of some of Greenberg's misdeeds, I deeply regretted my friendship with him. And on that note, I want to speak to my constituents.
Go ahead.
Because I do believe that it's fair for the people of Northwest Florida to judge me based on the associations that I've had. And I deeply regret my association with Joel Greenberg, politically, socially, and otherwise. But when folks evaluate that, I hope they evaluate it alongside the good work that I've done to advance our military mission, to fight for our values, and to be a representative in Congress who never fears the battle and is always in the arena for these great folks.
Hey everybody! I just feel like I haven't been on here in a while. I have been so busy trying to connect with you all and grow my business and just being so involved in the community. I'm actually on my way right now to a professional women's luncheon with our Lieutenant Governor. I'm so excited.
That's the voice of Abby Greenberg, Joel Greenberg's wife and the mother of his 2 children. She was recording a video for Instagram while driving in late September, one of many she has posted on social media in recent months as she works to grow her business as a realtor. She, too, is working to distance herself from the former tax collector. The month after that post, she filed for divorce from her husband and indicated in legal filings that she was also a victim of her husband's improprieties. The Sentinel's Martin Comas has been tracking the developments.
On October 15th, Abby Greenberg filed for divorce from Joel Greenberg, saying that their marriage is irretrievably broken and should be dissolved. She's asking for shared responsibility of their 2 children, who are now ages 3 and 4. And in her divorce filing, Abby Greenberg does note that Joel Greenberg is currently awaiting sentencing and will likely be incarcerated for a number of years. Abby Greenberg also notes in her divorce filing that Joel Greenberg had, quote, sold or disposed, unquote, of much of their marital assets to fund his criminal activities. She also points out that he invested most of his earnings in cryptocurrency. And now Abby Greenberg in her divorce filing is asking the court to liquidate those investment accounts and that half of the proceeds go to her. Now, it should be noted that Joel Greenberg's attorneys have also denied these allegations by Abby Greenberg in her court filing.
It wasn't too long ago that the Greenbergs were a rising power couple in Seminole County GOP circles. Their marriage traced Joel Greenberg's stunning rise to elected office and his fall into disgrace.
Joel Greenberg and Abby Weldon were married in Seminole County in February 2016. Just a couple months before Joel Greenberg launched his campaign for tax collector. You know, that year was filled with good fortune for Greenberg and seemingly the best year of his life. He was just married, and then in August, in a stunning victory in the Republican primary, he defeated longtime incumbent Ray Valdez, who had served as Seminole's tax collector for 18 years. And then by May 2017, Joel and Abby Greenberg had their first child, and then a second child was born in October 2018. But then things seemed to go downhill from there. In February 2020, Secret Service agents began investigating Greenberg and the tax collector's office. And by June 2020, Greenberg was first arrested, and then he resigned a day later on June 24th. By the end of 2020, Joel and Abby Greenberg started living separately, with Abby Greenberg moving to South Florida to live with her mother. And then on March 2nd, Greenberg violated the bond restrictions from his June arrest, including his curfew, by traveling to Jupiter, Florida to visit her. He was arrested a day later and has been in the Orange County jail since then.
Abby Greenberg received her real estate license November 11, 2020, and launched a Facebook page days later. She promotes her business frequently with updates on home sales, advice for buyers and sellers, and home improvement tips.
Hey everybody, I am just coming to give you an update. I've been here all day at our home inspection for this beautiful house in Heathrow Woods, and I just kind of wanted to point out some of the features of Heathrow Woods versus Heathrow. It's just a little bit more exclusive.
This month, the Greenbergs struck a deal with the federal government, allowing them to sell their own home in Heathrow, which they purchased for $600,000 in 2019. Abby Greenberg is listed online as the agent for the property. Once it sells, she'll get to keep half the proceeds. Joel's half, meanwhile, will be directed into an account held by the clerk of court, where it will be used to pay restitution to his victims.
As you know from individual briefings, I've had several meetings with our outside counsel, Carol Wick of Foley Lardner, attorney Frisch Scheller, who represents Joel Greenberg, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and of course our current tax collector, J.R. Kroll. As I've said in the past, restitution in a criminal proceeding is a unique process involving several steps.
That was Applegate again, the county attorney, explaining to commissioners the process he's been working through to claw back taxpayer money from Joel Greenberg. The first step of that process happened in November when a judge authorized the clerk of court to create an interest-bearing account to accept deposits from Greenberg that can be used as restitution for his victims after he's sentenced in March. Among those victims are the taxpayers of Seminole County.
So now for step two. I have reached a tentative agreement, verbal agreement, and I emphasize verbal, with Joel Greenberg's attorney, Frisch Schoer, for restitution in the amount of $1,870,351.61.
That's a huge figure, obviously, conveying the scope of Greenberg's corruption and its impact on the county. Let's break down what he's paying for. Of that total, $98,000 is for equipment Greenberg purchased to mine and transact Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. Another $354,000 was for use of tax office credit cards. As we've discussed before, Greenberg and his lieutenants used them in ways that county auditors have since described as unjustifiable. Applegate said $262,000 of the restitution is for what he called a property flip. He told commissioners he could not explain further, but the Sentinel has reported previously about a curious property transaction that cost taxpayers exactly that amount. We'll get back to that shortly. The county is getting roughly $2,700 in restitution for sports memorabilia that Greenberg bought himself. But that's far from the biggest chunk of cash. Greenberg is paying back nearly $472,000 that he spent on attorneys to shield him after the U.S. Department of Justice began investigating him in early 2020. And he's coughing up more than $685,000 that the tax office paid to consultants during his tenure. Applegate didn't reveal which consultants Greenberg was paying restitution for, but as we've detailed in prior episodes, auditors flagged numerous questionable contracts he doled out. Many of them to Republican allies and friends, including members of his own bridal party, a city commissioner in Longwood, and Seminole County's former election supervisor. Also on the tax office payroll was Keith Ingersoll, a real estate investor who has recently found himself in the crosshairs of the same prosecutors who took down Greenberg last year.
Is there anything else you want to say about the 41 counts today?
No, he's denied the allegations in court today, and he's prepared to mount a vigorous defense.
That exchange was between a reporter for a local TV news station and Andrew Searle, who's the attorney representing Keith Ingersoll. The two men were leaving the federal courthouse in downtown Orlando in mid-November after Ingersoll's arrest that morning. In an indictment, prosecutors accused Ingersoll and another man, James Adamczyk, of bilking an Orlando area investor out of more than $12 million they claimed would be used on real estate deals in Florida, other states, and the Bahamas. A federal prosecution team, which includes the lead prosecutor on Greenberg's case, Roger Handberg, said Ingersoll and Adamczyk told the investor they needed the money to cover deposits on contracts they signed to purchase various properties, which they planned to immediately flip to other buyers. But the contracts were allegedly fabricated. And the investor's money, which the men told the investor would be held in escrow, according to the indictment, in reality, they spent it on themselves to pay for luxury cars, travel, and adult entertainment. As the reporter said, Ingersoll faces 41 criminal counts. He pleaded not guilty during that hearing in November. Back in January 2017, Ingersoll was hired by Joel Greenberg as a real estate advisor. Then, just 4 months into the tax collector's tenure, Ingersoll and Greenberg used taxpayer money to buy a vacant former bank building owned by a company called Shooters Orlando, Inc. The owner of Shooters Orlando was Adamczyk, Ingersoll's now co-defendant. And Adamczyk's company had only owned the building for a few hours prior to flipping it to Greenberg. Shooters had bought the building for $680,000 the same day the tax collector's office later bought it for $810,000, a $130,000 profit for Adamczyk. A county audit concluded after Greenberg's downfall flagged the purchase as, quote, possibly fraudulent activity that had, as Auditor Dan O'Keefe phrased it, collusion written all over it. Greenberg even gave Adamczyk an additional $132,000 in public funds for the office furniture in the building and a bank vault. Add it all up, and you get $262,000, the amount Greenberg is now paying the county back as restitution for a property flip. On the surface, the fraud case against Ingersoll and Adamczyk is unrelated to Greenberg's prosecution. There's no indication he was involved in helping prosecutors secure indictments against these two former associates as part of his ongoing cooperation. But Mark O'Mara, the veteran legal commentator, said arrests of Greenberg associates could indicate that his own case is progressing and may be the first public signs of how substantial his assistance has been.
I would look for additional arrests. I would look for additional indictments. Those would be some insight that the assistance is both substantial and ongoing.
As March nears, it's also possible that people implicated in Greenberg's case will themselves plead guilty to charges, as he did, and join in assisting prosecutors to pursue higher value targets.
They may go the path of Greenberg, right? And say, okay, you got us, but we also have some other information for you, so let us do substantial assistance. Remembering that, in the federal system, 98% of cases resolve themselves short of trial. Those that do go to trial have a very high percentage of conviction. Like that not to be true, but federal prosecutors are really good at what they do.
That's the end of this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. It was produced by the Sentinel's Wesley Alden and featured reporting from me, as well as staff writers Martin Comas and Jason Garcia. Looking ahead to 2022, we'll continue to put out episodes as events demand, including if and when the investigation produces any additional charges, indictments, or pleas. We'll also continue to keep you up to speed on the latest findings of our ongoing work investigating political corruption, both locally and across the state. March is right around the corner. You'll be hearing from us soon. Thanks for listening. Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and tell your friends. And continue to follow our coverage of this saga at orlandosentinel.com/Greenberg.